Hello and welcome to the online edition of Brighton SEO Autumn 2021. I'm Tom Wells, speaking on behalf of Searchmetrics, an industry-leading SEO company. Follow us on Twitter at Searchmetrics, and if you want to grab the slides, head on over to the URL on the cover slide. We've got an awful lot to cover in the next 20 minutes, so I'm going to crack straight on with what I've got to say. So here we go. So just up front, Searchmetrics is an industry-leading SEO suite. In my experience, although I am slightly biased, definitely has the best features out there, so please check it out if you get a chance. So what are we talking about today? We're talking about data and how we can use it to improve and optimize your website. Really, the focus of this talk is to show you how to interpret data, because often we're just served the insights, but we don't really get to see under the hood how that insight might actually be calculated. So often we have to understand what's happening behind the scenes and take the insights with a grain of salt. But as we'll see, knowing how to interpret the data can really, really show us where we need to optimize our websites. So some of the data sources we're going to be talking about, starting from the top of the little logos and going clockwise, we're talking about Lighthouse data. That little U is the Google Chrome User Experience Report, Google BigQuery, HTTP Archive, and Searchmetrics. Some of these data sources you may be familiar with, some of them you may not be. That's absolutely fine. I'm going to lead you through that. So here we go. So big data is, everyone has their own definition. I just like to think of it as anything that would break an Excel sheet, or when we're talking about millions and millions of data points, something that you can't really picture in your head or imagine. This is definitely the case for the Chrome User Experience Report, which we can access with Google BigQuery. The same is true for HTTP Archive. Now, one of the problems with big data is they do tend to miss granular insights, but we'll be coming onto that very shortly. I'm going to show you how you can combine big data insights with SEO tools to show you where you can optimize your websites. So why are we talking about data? Well, first let's have a quick review of the state of online performance as a whole. So this data is from a source called HTTP Archive. Highly valuable. I suggest you check it out if you get a chance. Basically, they query the results from the Google Chrome User Experience Report, as well as other sources as well. Effectively, Google Chrome users who opt in to have their browsing experience monitored. And then every month, these charts are updated. So what we're looking at is loading speed. I'm sure we're all familiar with Core Web Vitals. One of the key metrics that we look at in page speed or Lighthouse scores is called First Contentful Paint, which is effectively just a proxy for loading speed. Now, if we look at this chart, which goes from January 2017 to May 2021 this year, we can effectively see a flat line. Light blue is desktop, purple is mobile. So we can conclude that in general, loading speed is not improving over time. And this isn't just for a few websites. They query about 6, 7 million, 8 million at last count, something in that region for each desktop and mobile. So this is an example of how big data can tell us something interesting. Even though we have fancy CDNs or all of these plugins, the core loading speed for users is not improving. So that's a major issue, right? One of the causes of this slow loading speed is web pages are actually getting heavier over time. So the actual size, the file size of the page, again, we can see our blue and our purple lines slowly increasing all the way back from July 2011 up to January this year. The bounds above the line is sort of the maximum range, somewhere in the region of about 4 megabytes, which we also found in our recent Searchmetrics study. The average is about 2.5 to 4 megabytes for a site, which is really quite large. if you consider that this is actually at the page level, not the whole domain. So one page, the user has to query more than 4 megabytes in some cases to simply get usually quite basic information. So how did we get here? Most of us are familiar with web builders. That's something like Wix, WordPress, or Squarespace. You know, they allow us to build websites incredibly quickly, which is great. We can turn around a website in a matter of days rather than months. And they have a great user interface, you know, drag and drop, happy days. However, there are some drawbacks. So web builders aren't really optimized for performance. Now, what does this really mean? Let's look at some data. Okay, LCP, largest contentful paint. Again, a core web vital, a metric used for a proxy for loading speed. Google looks for an LCP of less than 2.5 seconds. LCP, the largest element on the page, for desktop should be loaded in less than 2.5 seconds. Now, the data shows the percentage of sites that have a good LCP split by web builder, WordPress, Wix, and Squarespace, the 3 from the last slide. Interestingly, less than 30% of all sites that were monitored from this data set have a good LCP. We can conclude quite categorically that the majority of web builder sites do not have a good LCP. So if you have built your website with this underlying technology, you can quite clearly see that the web builders haven't done a great job of optimizing for speed. But this leaves us in a quandary. How are we able to optimize something that we don't really have great access to under the hood? A question we'll be revisiting quite a lot in this talk. So just to summarize the disadvantage of web builders, and again, this is not to speak badly of them, they do serve a purpose. However, it is hard to customate the template once you've set it live. You often need developer support to kind of do SEO fixes, and the pages often load elements you don't need. If you actually look in something like Google Developer Tools and see all of the assets that these web builders load, you might be surprised at how many you actually don't need. So why big data is great? I'm a huge fan of big data. I'm a data analyst myself, but it doesn't always work, and we do have to take it with a grain of salt. Here's a really good example. Again, from the same HTTP archive dataset, FID stands for first input delay. Again, one of the 3 Core Web Vitals metrics. It's a proxy metric for user interactivity. In simple terms, it measures how long a user has to wait before interacting with a page. Looking at our 3 web builders for June 2021 out to July 21, it looks that almost 100% of websites built with these 3 web builders have a good FID. This obviously does not match with general user experience. Typically on both desktop and mobile, user experience is not great. Often we have a slight delay. So what's actually going on here? The reason is first input delay is actually a user metric. It's real data. That means Google has to track how long it is before a user interacts with a page. However, in practice, there simply isn't enough data, but this data set defaults to saying that the website passes this test, even if there's no data available. Highly misleading because people think they're doing a great job in FID. Enter Searchmetrics. So we did a recent study focusing on Core Web Vitals, although I would also like to point out at this stage, the focus was on many metrics, not just the 3 Core Web Vitals. There were other ones included as well, a total of 15 that are thought to have an influence on Google rankings. Like we said, there isn't enough user data for FID to measure it reliably. We used Google's recommendation, total blocking time, as a proxy. This is something that could be measured directly in page speed. We found that a good TBT is around 0.3 seconds. This is a Google recommendation. Our data suggests that almost all industries are universally outside of this. This suggests that most websites, in fact, do not have a good FID, directly contradicting the big data findings. We can see the general is all of the industries aggregated together. We've got B2B, news, electronics, with quite a large delay before the user can interact with the page. Again, that's just to highlight that big data doesn't always work. Sometimes you have to go in and do your own research as well. Another reason for slow user experience are what I call the plugin economy, things like Yoast SEO, Hotjar Analytics, Woo Commerce. Similar graph, we're looking at LCP for loading time. We can again see that less than a third of websites involving these plugins, again, this is from the HTTP archive dataset, have a good loading time. So we can say that web builders and plugins definitely do not help online performance. But again, this leads us to another tricky position, because as marketers and business owners, we do need these plugins to be able to measure user data and to be able to action marketing strategies. So how do we balance user experience with internal needs of what we need to accomplish? So again, just a quick summary of the plugins. They do add unnecessary code to your site, making the overall file size larger. It's really difficult to optimize. Plugins come as a sort of, a plug and play where you add the code to the site and then you can't really optimize. And they do slow loading time, as we've shown with the previous slide. So what influences the Google algorithm? So it's not just loading time. There are many factors. However, a significant amount do have to do with loading time. And this should really be made into your primary focus. We'll see why. So again, this is a slide from the recent Searchmetrics study, which you can find online. Most of the metrics that correlate with good Google rankings relate directly or indirectly to loading time. Total byte weight is file size. Images, again, is file size, because the more optimized an image, the smaller the size, the quicker it loads. And as load time increases, so does the probability of the user leaving the site. This is one of the reasons why Google gives it so much importance when ranking sites and measuring user experience. So how do we understand our own performance, and more importantly, how do we improve it? So the first step would be to go to the Google PageSpeed test. Please just Google PageSpeed test. You'll see a little blue box. Enter a page you'd like to test. Here's the URL if you need it. I'd recommend testing different pages around your site, your blog page, the overview of a product page, different landing pages, and the home page. You may see different results depending on the pages you test. So how do we analyze the results? You'll see at the top a number from 0 to 100. This is in fact your Lighthouse score. A lot of people get this confused, but at the top of the PageSpeed test, Google directly imports your Lighthouse score. It's important to understand how this is weighted. Only 6 metrics affect this score, some of which we've already talked about: FCP and LCP, basically measuring how quickly the page loads, and the largest element, how long this takes. We also have speed index, time to interactive, total blocking time, and cumulative layout shift. So 85%, you can see the weightings just over here. I'll just circle this. The weightings of each metric just here. Okay, so 85% of those metrics are effectively measuring loading time, and only 15% is given to visual stability, which is cumulative layout shift. Okay, so if you have incredible loading time across the first 5 metrics in this list, you're very likely to have a high performance score. So let's look at some data for the UK. So Searchmetrics analyzed the top 20 ranking pages for thousands and thousands of keywords, and we calculated the average Lighthouse score to be just 29 out of 100, with TBT getting the overall lowest metric score. Total blocking time is effectively the proxy for first input delay, so it's effectively how long a user has to wait before they can interact with the page. 29 out of 100 is not great. There's plenty of room for improvement there. Mobile, we calculated 35 out of 100 for the average. I would like to point out that for reasons that we don't have time to go into, the mobile data in Lighthouse is a little bit less reliable than desktop. So we are actually going to skip this section for now and move straight on to how you can improve your own performance. Okay, so here are the top 5 ways to improve your online performance with an emphasis on loading time. Okay, so number 1, optimize for loading speed. Again, this is some really cool Searchmetrics data. We can see how heavy the average page is by industry, with news sites being the heaviest. No surprise given the streams of ad banners and large full-width images that are often there. And on the right, we can see the average LCP. Remember, a good LCP is just 2.5 seconds. All those industries, again, this is just the top 20 websites, are well outside of that benchmark. So what can you do to improve and be ahead of the pack? Try and reduce the overall size of your web page. You can do things like optimize images, CSS files, JavaScript files. Check the largest element on your page. What is it, and can you find a way to optimize it? Okay. Avoid loading massive overview pages. If you have thousands of products, consider loading the first 15 relevant ones and lazy loading the rest. Or redirecting a user to another category page so that you keep the overall page size down. Okay, avoid web fonts and any extra resources where possible. Number 2, the big question: do you really need that app, plugin, or block of code? Many times you'll say yes, but there is a use case where I would recommend you have a look. So, unused JavaScript. This is JavaScript that's on your web page that is never even used. We analyzed how much different industries could save. We saw that the news industry, on average, could save 1.13 seconds simply by removing code that's not really, it serves no useful function. Okay, so we checked the BBC website, for example. If you see this statistic here, 1.25 seconds, that's the amount of loading time the BBC could save just by deleting code that's never even used. How can you do this? Again, go to the little blue box, the page speed test. These results will be shown to you directly. Show your developers and ask them to do an audit of what resources could safely be removed. Again, racing through now, conscious of time. So identify critical elements and optimize what you really need. We've touched on a few of these points. I'd recommend compressing images and videos as much as possible. You can consider PNG compression using a plugin such as Squoosh. If you download these slides, these links are actually hyperlinks that will take you directly to the resources, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. You can consider using an image format WebP by Google themselves. That actually reduces image size by 25% without losing any quality. Inline critical JS and CSS, this is one for your developers. I have linked a handy guide on how to do this. It is a little bit more of an advanced use case. The same is true for lazy loading, but they are things your web teams should absolutely be aware of. Consider using a CDN. A CDN is a content delivery network. A content delivery network can dramatically improve site loading times. It optimizes the server-side delivery of content to users. They're relatively easy to set up. But I would like to point out they should be used in conjunction with ongoing SEO efforts. CDNs are not a magic bullet. If you have a great SEO team combined with a CDN, you're probably easily going to be ahead of the average website that we've analyzed, which can only do wonders for your rankings and for your organic traffic. And finally, of course, we'd always recommend speaking with an SEO expert or brands such as Searchmetrics, because they can really look at all the data as we've done, tie everything together, and come up with a plan that can help you stay ahead of the pack. So I really hoped you enjoyed this talk. We did cover a lot in 20 minutes, so I would recommend grabbing the slides from that URL if you can. Checking out the resources that I link. There are lots of useful guides there. Pass it on to your web teams, to your SEOs. Ask them to have a look at what I said, some of the tips that I mentioned, and hopefully you can be boosting your page speed scores off the back of that. So thanks very much, and thanks to the organizers of Brighton SEO who've done an amazing job. Take care and see you next time.